Welcome to Diabreadic, the podcast where a T1D artist and a T1D expert come together to bake some bread, and then we break bread with smart and interesting people as we talk through the human in health and technology. I'm Stephen Horrocks, PhD and expert in experiences with diabetes and devices.
And I'm Melissa Horrocks. I am a T1D artist, maker, baker, creator of all things.
And on this episode, we're going to be talking about banana bread and the physical traces of insulin pump use, along with a number of the other kind of devices and experiences related to treatment. But should be a fascinating, interesting conversation. And
come join us.
Okay, so Melissa.
Yes.
I have a question for you.
You haven't told me this question beforehand, so
I know.
I'm nervous.
It's nothing to be nervous about, of course. But banana bread, right? Is banana bread bread?
Oh, gosh.
Or is it cake?
I don't know why they call it bread, because it's like just totally cake. I don't know. I mean, you make it in a bread pan, so I suppose.
Yeah.
What's the definition of bread? These are the kind of things I'm like, who cares?
It's interesting though, right?
Food.
Because, it is. We call it banana bread. But pretty much everything except for the fact that it is kind of usually done in a loaf pan. Everything else about it
is cake-like.
Mm-hmm. But it's not the only one either, because we got zucchini bread and pumpkin bread and other of these that often are referred to as like quick breads.
Yeah.
But
complicated.
They're kind of basically cake. But also, who cares? Because it's delicious, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of sugar and stuff in it too. So.
Well, that's true. But there are a lot of breads that have a lot of sugar too.
You're right.
So,
I don't know. What's the official definition of bread?
Well, I don't know. And we had this conversation a little bit because in a previous episode, Laura Furlano talked about bread adjacent or other like glutinous things. Because when we were talking about bread with her, she basically was like, I mean, I don't eat much of bread, but like I eat noodles like crazy. And so then it raises this question. Okay, so what are the boundaries of bread? What defines something as bread? And that's fascinating.
So the official definition of bread is food made of flour, water, and yeast or another leavening agent mixed together and baked. So if it's leavened, it's bread. But if it's not leavened, it's not bread. And then we run into some serious limitations. Because unleavened breads still bread
are a
Crackers?
staple for a lot of people around the world still, even now.
Yeah.
And historians of bread, food historians, because that's a thing, talk about how unleavened breads have been really the staple of kind of human sustenance for centuries, long before leavening practices became normalized in different ways around the world. So it's really, that's why.
So my definition was still carried a lot of questions.
Yeah, but that's, that's part of the fun of this kind of stuff though, because I'd
probably call it cake. Like the texture, when you eat it, it feels like cake to me.
Yeah.
Although there's not frosting on it,
But not all cakes have frosting. That's not the defining characteristic of cake either, right? But you got this crumbly texture almost,
Yeah, I mean.
You don't have gluten development and kind of the production of a dough like you often do with
Yeah, I mean, you mix
breads.
it like a cake.
And so you have a batter.
Like a quick cake, yeah.
Right? And so there's like batter versus doughs, but that's also a limitation. Like anyway.
Good question.
I find it interesting, nevertheless.
This is why Steve is a scholar.
That's why I do what I do. Okay. But this recipe's really good.
Yeah.
You've made this a number of times.
Yeah,
I
got it from an Instagram friend. I followed her for a long time, Aubrey Benyon. I hope I'm saying that right. I've never met her in person, but Aubrey Benyon. She is awesome. She's full of color and life, and I love following her. So we'll link her in the show notes. But she has this famous banana bread recipe she always talks about, and it is so good every time we make it.
It's ridiculously good.
So, I mean, what I love about banana bread in particular is you just throw it all in there, mix it. Like there's no add this first, do this 10 million steps. It's like throw it all in, mix it, pour it in, pour it in, the oven. You know? So I love this recipe. It has almond as well as vanilla, buttermilk, which is key.
Yeah.
In some of the richness of the flavor. You butter the top when it comes out, which makes the top crispy, and we sprinkle sugar on the top, which kind of gives it like this caramelized crunch on the top, which is so good. I think that's an addition I just did one time because I thought it sounded like it would sweeten it up.
It certainly does that.
Definitely doesn't need that, but it is kind of fun to add that delicious layer. It's awesome. We'd been saving up bananas for a long time. Our freezer was just full of black bananas.
Holy cow. Like, I don't even know how many did we end up having in there?
We had like 10 that we pulled out, and Harper had her little friend over, and her eyes when she saw the black bananas, I think she was like, wow, you guys have some really rotten bananas.
These look really bad. Like, yeah, well, it's about the way that the cold interacts with the peel. It just turns it black. But
yeah, I mean, good tip. If you don't know, you can throw your bananas in the freezer and collect them.
Yeah.
I guess.
As they start to get overripe and you don't want to eat them anymore, pop them in the freezer. It'll keep them more or less at that point, even though the peels get black.
Yeah. I mean, they get really gross and slimy and
yeah. So like if anyone has ever accidentally left their bananas in the car when they went to the store in the wintertime, you come back out in the morning, they're black. It's because the cold interacts with the peel. It turns it all black. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's gone rotten though. Right.
Yeah. So, but yeah, Harper's friend, man, she went to town and peeled those. She peeled them and squished them into the bowl and like mashed them all up. I didn't even like tell her to. I was like, oh, I'll come help you guys in a minute. And she just like went for it, which I was grateful for because that's the worst part is trying to peel those things.
Yeah, she was just mashing away. And I came in a few minutes later and I was like, here, let me stir it around and see if there are any clumps. And there were a couple. I was like, oh, there's a couple here. I like to do it this way. And she just bam, 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 bam. That was amazing.
Yeah, the kids loved helping. Which is another great reason to make this because it's not finicky. You just add it in. Even if you got the ingredients a little off, it would be fine. I mean, speaking of...
We have some experience in that area.
Man, there was like a month period where so I think my parents were visiting and I made this banana bread because I was like, oh, my dad will really like this. And we cut into it in the morning and I'm like, this tastes weird. What is wrong with this? And I'd forgotten to put sugar in it. And I mean, it was okay. It definitely tasted weird. But like the structure, you wouldn't have known. I didn't know I forgot an ingredient.
Yeah, I mean, especially since you sugared the top. And so there was sweetness present, but just not in the bread.
I don't know if I sugared the top of the...
I think we did. But anyway,
I think that was when we started sugaring the top.
Yeah.
Because I had forgotten the sugar. I was like, let's add some sweetness to the top and see if it helps. And then we were like, ooh, we should do this.
Yeah, this is good.
But then while they were still here, I then tried to make it again. And this time.
Well, I came down in the morning because you had made it kind of in the middle of the night, more or less. And I came down in the morning and opened the microwave. And it's like, oh, she must have accidentally like double melted some butter for this recipe.
Nope. Forgot it.
No, it just didn't get put in there.
It actually was really good still.
It was still delicious.
Which really surprised me. I thought anyway, so test out leaving some stuff out. Maybe you'll find a new way to make it. I don't know.
For real?
We could not tell visually that we had left things out, really.
No,
I don't think.
I don't think so. I mean, the one without sugar was definitely less dark.
Yeah, it was lighter.
In the bake, which makes sense because the sugar caramelizes and so you get that darker crust, which is one of my favorite things about this recipe, is it gets super caramelized on the outside and is so rich and delicious. But anyway.
It's great. Try it out. You won't regret it.
Okay, so before we jump into the conversation centered around our main theme for this episode, we wanted to, I guess, bring forward a little bit of news related to the show, and that is that we have a new website.
Woohoo!
I don't know if it will be live when this goes up or fairly soon thereafter.
This week.
But it will be this week. But we've been kind of putting some things together there and getting this started for like quite some time. And so
I'm a designer, but I hate web design. I hate it ever since college. I just shut down. But I am picky about how things look. So I'm like, I don't want it to look this way, but I also don't have any desire to fix it. So, it'll look what it looks like, and it'll be informative.
Well, oh my word. You're saying that as if it's like bad. It's not.
It's not.
It's not. But
none of my designer friends judge me.
But, the nice thing about that is that we can continue to update the design and layout over time. And so that'll be great. But the nice thing is that this is going to do a few things for us in relation to the show, right? For one thing, it will be a lot easier for us to be able to help all of you get access to the episodes and the other content that we are talking about on the show all in one place. As of right now, we have a link tree URL, which is pretty handy for sure. It's a clickable, streamlined way to get people to different streaming services, but it doesn't necessarily allow us the room to produce all of the content the way that we want to, accessible the way we want it to be.
So check it out.
But that's not the focus of this episode. We are, however, going to talk a little bit about the ways that using devices in the context of treatment and chronic illness, and particularly in relation to diabetes, since that's our kind of focus right now here, leave traces of their relationship to people, our relationship to them, in ways that in some ways are obvious and in other ways are a little less so. But they do that in some really kind of conspicuous ways. And part of what's interesting about this, right, as we've talked about in previous episodes, a lot of these devices, the CGMs, the glucose monitors, the insulin pumps, these devices are absolutely life-changing for a lot of people. The way that they are oriented to assist in producing different quality of life changes for people is serious. It's a big deal. Yeah,
it really is. And as with any life-changing thing, sometimes that comes with difficult aspects of those things,
Yeah, it's not so simple, right? I've heard people talk about these things, the insulin pump and the CGM, in terms of a miracle, that this has been a miracle in their lives, right?
Yeah, I think it changes so much about how you live day to day and your relationship to, remembering to bring everything with you and all the things you need when you're doing shots that is sort of not eliminated, but day to day at least, because you're only using it, changing it every couple days or week, depending on your device, which changes a lot of, I think, the frustration of having a million things you have to remember all the time, at least for me.
Yeah. And so even though you still have a ton of things to remember, there's a lot fewer, and that's a big deal.
Yeah.
But it's also complicated.
Yeah. It adds another layer of
right
complication, obviously.
Yeah, big time. And that happens in a lot of ways. But one of the things that I think is interesting about these types of devices, and it's particular to things like insulin pumps and CGMs, but there are other kinds of devices involved in treating chronic illness that are similar in this way. They are always present, right?
Yeah.
And you have a couple of these devices, right? You have a CGM and an insulin pump. These things don't really ever go away.
Yeah.
They're just there.
Yeah, the other day my sensor had died. I've just now thought about talking about it in death terms.
Oh, that is interesting.
My sensor died.
The sensor died.
I mean, it basically just was the last day of my sensor. And then my pump ran out of insulin at the same time. And so I took them off and it was like, whoa. That doesn't happen a lot. I feel like it never lines up. It's usually a day off or something. Yeah. But when it does, it's like weird. It's so weird. And it's weird that it's weird.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's strange how having both of them off feels freeing. But, they're still there. They're just not on you. They're still present and waiting and looming like, oh, I have to put it back on.
So but in a lot of ways, though, it's like it's become a part of you and your body's like processes and things. And so...
Yeah, every little daily task, going to the bathroom, changing your clothes, all the things that are like, back of your brain, normal things.
Yeah, just
turn into like
thing.
Kind of annoying tasks. Like, okay, I've got to hold it in between my chin and my chest while I like try and put my pants on. And like, where do you put it? Like, let me set it on the dresser, but then I have to stay close to the dresser instead of like, if you step away, then it falls and does that like pull thing. Because like, I'm too tall, just too tall for it to reach the ground. Steve's heard and seen that happen. It's
many times.
It doesn't always pull off because that tape is strong. That insulin pump tape is strong. Speaking of,
but that yank, right?
Steve's great at sound effects.
But that's ridiculous. But this what you're saying kind of points toward one of the key issues here, right? And that is, if you're using this thing to facilitate your injection of insulin all day, every day, it has to be there. It has to be there, right? It has to be present all the time, which means you got to put it somewhere.
Yeah.
And you've talked about a couple of them, right? On the one hand, like, okay, so let's say you've got some pants on. Those pants have a pocket. You can put it in the pocket. That can work. Cool. That seems straightforward.
Women's pockets.
Okay. Can we talk about gendered like pants?
Yeah.
Because not all pants are created equal in the pocket department.
Yeah. Fake pockets, tiny pockets.
Yes. And there was a study, this would have been a few years ago, I want to say 2018, that a couple of people did looking at all of the I think it was like 5 or 6 of the largest brands of jeans, women's jeans, the highest selling like articles of clothing, and assessed the pocket size in relation to all of the most popular cell phones on the market.
Oh my gosh.
Cell
phones.
This will surprise very few of you. But the vast majority of them, I want to say almost none of them, there might have been 1 or 2 outliers here, none of them could fit one of these phones.
Yeah, front pockets especially.
Oh, front pockets are a non-issue.
The back pockets are
even back pockets
a little better, but
they're still not going to hold your
phone's
iPhone.
Still going to stick
whatever
out.
It was. I think like 11 at that point is what it was when that study was done. But none of these phones will fit there, and what that means is, in the context of insulin pumps, the size of pockets will affect how well you can or can't use your pocket. I mean, do you use pockets?
So if I'm wearing jeans, I'll like clip it onto the edge of the pocket, but it doesn't really go in, like, it's not concealed in the pocket by any means. It's like sticking out because it's wide for a pocket. But I usually, I don't know, I'm a leggings wearer. So,
Fair.
I mean, that's kind of my go-to is like stick it in the top of your tight leggings.
Like the waistband, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I'll stick it in the front of the pocket, but it's more half in, half out because I have a clip on it that like clips to the pocket.
Yeah.
But it's still kind of annoying.
And so, like, a couple of things there. For one, we get to another side of the way that gendered fashion conventions affect how you can and can't keep your insulin pump. Because my pockets in my pants that are designed for for men, quote unquote, masculine presenting people, right? Front pockets and back pockets are not only deep enough to hold the insulin pump itself as a whole, but they are cut in a way that provides space enough for objects.
And I guess it depends on how tight your pants are.
Well, yeah.
So, I mean, you know.
But again, fashion conventions, right, are gendered. And that area around the kind of from like hips to knees, right? Gendered fashion conventions in general make women's pants tight from the waist to the knee. And there is some variation, depending on the cut, from the knee down on how
fashion
tight they
trends
are.
have kind of leaned towards more baggy kind of wear in the past couple of years.
But nevertheless, right, there is rarely, if ever, space for things.
It is funny because I did try on some looser fit pants recently, and the pockets were still like short. Like they don't have deep pockets. It might have just been the brand. I don't know. I'm not an expert on pants, clearly, but
fair enough. I mean,
and like dressing rooms lately are not a thing, so I haven't really tried on pants in a long time, like at a store.
I guess that's a good point too.
So I'm not up to date on current trends.
There's not a whole lot.
Dressing rooms.
Yeah, in dressing rooms because, pandemic has really thrown a wrench in that gear.
But still, I mean, you have to put it somewhere, and it's awkward and weird and changes the like way that you wear your clothes.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we've really talked a lot about you and your research specifically. But I mean, you've done a lot of research on this and interviews, and I mean, your dissertation basically is largely
around some of these conversations for sure. And this this conversation like intersects with so many, I think, important conversations. And we've already started talking through a lot of those with guests and with each other in a lot of these episodes so far. But yeah, one of the things that we haven't really talked about is some of the ways that device use, we're talking about some very particular things in this episode about how using these devices leaves a trail. It leaves traces, right? One of the things that sometimes is missed in that, because we talk a lot about traces on the body, which we'll come back to in a second. But one of the things that we don't usually talk about is how it affects some of your other cultural practices. And so the traces of pump use show up in some really like conspicuous places, odd places, different places. So clothing choice is oftentimes, and we've talked about this, you and I, but I've talked with other people about this as well. The very act of using these devices does affect the kinds of clothes people buy, the kinds of clothes they decide to wear, and when. And when you layer that with the ways that fashion and the amount of work required by some is deeply gendered, we start to add some layers of complexity here. And, the traces of pump use in the area of something like fashion and clothing is disproportionately felt by women, and in particular women of color as well. So
yeah, I mean, it is interesting to think about. I've been doing it for so long that I guess your fashion choices sort of reflect ease where you can, like I could never just wear a dress without thinking about where to put it, right? Like,
yeah.
It's not like you want to clip it into like the front,
where are you gonna put it?
like
because some people do. Some people put it in their bra.
Yeah, but then you have to have
a lot of things too.
A big enough bra to fit it. So if you're a small-chested woman, or so there's a lot of factors that go into like, hide it. I remember when you were doing your studies and it was like, hide it in your bra, and I was like, what? Like, how
does one?
It does not work.
But that's a good point, because for some it can't work in that way. For some it does, very much so. In the same way that for some, using something like your waistband
right
works really well. For others, not so much. But yeah, something like a dress. And so again, we come back to gendered fashion conventions, and a dress usually, for one thing, is a like uniform piece of cloth or otherwise like sewn together cloth that from more or less shoulder past your waist anyway, almost to your knee or more. And so, but where's your pump site?
Yeah.
Right? Your pump site's somewhere in the middle of your body. And so do you pull your dress all the way up past your waist in order to get to it way up there?
And I think that's the biggest, you've hit on the nail. The biggest problem with like where you put it is like, well, then how do you access it? Because, okay, I can hide it on my leg or in my waistband, but then it's like, all right, let me pull up my dress to dose this insulin, which is super awkward.
So at the end of the day, but that requires that you remove yourself from certain public scenarios or situations in order to do the act of injection, which, as we have mentioned with some of our guests previously, which was and remains one of the kind of culturally stigmatizing things related to injections with syringes, is that there is a compulsion to move that kind of medical treatment, these devices, out of public view into somewhere like a bathroom. And if you're wearing a dress and your pump is on your, let's say, the waistband of your underwear or something, you still have to go into the bathroom to do the work of injecting.
Yeah, I mean, I started wearing like biker shorts under my dresses. So then it was like, all right, well, check out my biker shorts,
Totally.
So I think there's a level of where you are and like professionalism that comes into play too. Because if you just like DGAF, like whatever.
Totally.
As I become a parent, I sort of...
a lot of that goes to the wayside.
A lot of that I just don't care. I'm like, you know what, whatever.
We just got to like
pulling out my insulin pump.
But I think what you touched on is key, right? That in all of these kinds of decisions related to where you put your pump, you mentioned going to the bathroom. If it's on your waistband or in your pocket, either you better hope that your tube is super long so that it can just reach all the way down to the floor, or you've got to then put your pump somewhere else. And so like you said, you put it like, you hold it with your chin against your chest or something else, possibly.
Clip it somewhere.
Clip it
if you have a clip.
Some people don't have clips on them. But the clip is another way of like all of this still coming back to, you have to have access to the device in order to do the work it's intended to do. And so the choice as to where we put it is still deeply affected by what it's trying to do. And so as you're maneuvering, as you're sleeping and you're putting it on the bed, or some people put it like under their pillow because their tube is long enough, or some people clip it into whatever articles of clothing they're wearing or whatever, it's still got to be accessible.
Yeah.
Which, and this is a side note, because there is a pump manufacturer that went out of business a few years ago. They pulled out of the market, and that was Animas. Animas had a contract working relationship with One Touch, which is a blood glucose meter company.
Yeah, I used this for years.
And they had a wireless connection between the meter and the pump, but you could control the pump from the meter.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Which is amazing.
Yeah.
And with all of the current devices that are all connected with different devices right now as they exist, very few of them have tried to incorporate that kind of thing, which was like game-changing.
Yeah. It was really cool. And also, like, it was waterproof and, like, I could swim with it, not worry. Like, I think the new ones are kind of water
resistant. I think it's the language they use, yeah.
But mine always, like, goes haywire if I put it in the water. So,
yeah,
I mean,
so it's still not intended to be, like, submerged.
Oh, the Animus pump.
Right?
It was green.
It was. It was like a shimmery metallic green.
Pump.
It was a good pump.
That's the one I cried over when I put it in the mailbox to send it back.
And it wasn't until that pump was gone that a lot of the realization of how important being able to control it from an external device was, because you were able to just tuck it somewhere in your clothing, wherever, and then control it remotely.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until a different device when you couldn't do that it was like, what the crap? Why wouldn't this have it? This was... It
was basically just like, oh, it can send blood tests, basically.
Yeah. It'll compile your data, but it won't control the device.
Yeah.
And there's some background there. There are some legal issues that have come up with a particular manufacturer that has greatly limited their wireless connectivity ever since. So we're going to put a pin in that. So, we're talking a lot about these devices. They have a presence, right? Whether it's your insulin pump, which is kind of a little bit more obvious in this way because it is a pager-sized item, as we talked about with
right.
and it's got to go somewhere, and it's connected to you, so you got to find a way to deal with that. But you've also talked about...
there are tubeless pumps and things like that, so this isn't always across the board. But
that tubeless pump is attached to your body,
right?
And so it still affects some of your decision making, right? But obviously would be controlled remotely. You don't pull it off of your body because it's attached. Right. It's stuck on there. But you've also, pointed toward a couple of other things that are also always nearby and present, because the blood glucose meter, your tester, is always there,
Right. Where is it?
Yeah. And
thanks, Tile. I recently got a Tile. Any diabetics out there, get one of these because it has saved me hours. I only got it for Christmas a couple months ago. Oh my gosh, what have I been doing all these years? Like, it basically, it's a little device that you put in there and you can ping it from your phone when you lose it. So, like,
when is
on
the
your phone
word when you lose it.
Yes. It's amazing. It's so great. Get one.
You push the thing, it rings.
This isn't sponsored, but get one because
but like, Tile, if you want to sponsor, like, just let us know.
It's amazing. I seriously it's a life-changing device, honestly.
Yeah. Big time.
Oh man, like hours spent. Where was the last time I had it? Like looking, everybody who has diabetes knows.
But it actually gets to a point where it's actually pretty dire. The CGM that you have needs to be calibrated multiple times a day. And if you don't, then it doesn't work. It doesn't perform its function. It won't show you your information about where it's estimating you are. And so you have to use your blood tester to calibrate it. If you don't know where your tester is, then you have no idea where you're at. Yeah. And so it's got to be there, And I remember I had a conversation with someone a few years ago, and he was talking about his diagnosis moment, and he was young. I can't remember exactly how old, but probably single digits age, like 9, maybe 8 or 9. And he was talking about the moment in the hospital when his nurse came in with his blood tester that his parents had purchased there, I think, and was showing him how to use it. And he became immediately aware of the way that this thing would have to be by him, with him, forever.
Yeah.
That this device was not going anywhere, because he was going to have to rely on it forever.
Yeah.
Right? And that kind of, we're talking about a serious shift.
That's a big realization
in your
for
world.
a kid,
Yeah.
I don't know if I thought of that in a way that like that. That's really interesting.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting here is that this came in conversation.
Sure.
Right? Because there are a lot of things that we experience and we don't realize their implications until we're thinking back on them.
Right.
And I think that's what this situation was.
Mm-hmm.
That this person was like, I realized then, and I don't think that I was necessarily conscious of it, but I realized that I would have this forever.
Yeah.
And, the necessity of this thing being with you at all times brings with it a lot of complications, because those little pouches, while fairly compact, even in large pockets, these kinds of devices aren't necessarily easy to put there.
Oh, yeah. As a woman, we carry purses, we carry bags, right? That makes that a lot simpler than if you don't carry a bag around.
Right.
So I can't imagine carrying a blood tester in your pocket. I would not be able to have
because people can't.
You can't carry that in your pocket.
Right. And so, a lot of people then have to find some way to have a bag of their supplies. And if you're not using an insulin pump that's attached to your body, you've got to have your insulin. And so then there's more objects, and you've got to have them with you. And so even when they're not connected to your body necessarily, they have to be here. Mm-hmm. And they have to be accessible again.
Yeah. And this makes traveling or going anywhere like
oh my word,
so crazy. The amount of thought and stress that goes into making sure you're not forgetting things when you go anywhere, even just traveling for the day somewhere. Yeah. Okay, is my pump gonna run out of insulin? Is my sensor gonna die? Not as big of a deal because that's not if it dies, it's fine. But do I have my blood tester? Oh, am I going to run out of strips? How many strips do I have in the bottle?
Better bring
these
an
are
extra.
Things where it's
and if
okay,
my
I'm
pump's
just
low, I'm going to have to bring the stuff to be able to change it. And also, I guess I'd better bring an extra infusion site in case.
Right.
Because if it gets pulled out and I am an hour and a half away from home, I'm going to need to switch it out or.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing. Imagine you're going on vacation every day.
Right.
Because those are the feelings you have when you go on vacation. You're what am I forgetting? Am I going to forget my toothbrush? All those things. It's that's every day because, if you're going to be gone for a couple hours, you need those things. If you're going to be gone, it just adds this layer of dependency on these devices that is, part of, it's not I stress every day about it. That's not, because you become used to it. You become second nature to check in your head, okay, do I have this? It's the checklist in your brain that just plays automatically all the time.
But that means it's normalized. It becomes a normal part of your process and everything. But that is extra labor still. That's extra work involved in the everyday.
I think that's why people have so much burnout and
big time.
People talk about the exhaustion of having diabetes, and it, that obviously that's a big part of it.
It has to be, because on the one hand, it's exhausting because, as I've seen people talk about on the diabetes online community spaces like Twitter. Like your body just isn't doing the things to survive. And so you have to consciously do the work of an organ, right? That's like the logic of it.
Right.
And so, but that means that your brain has to be like on all the time. And so the work involved in doing all the things, gathering the things, but then also your body is doing all these things and it's exhausting. And then the psychological side of like, you know, like if I don't do these things, then like I would die. And so I just have to do these things. And it's, yeah, the burnout is super layered and all of that.
Especially when you're changing sites. I mean, we kind of talked about, I mean, we haven't talked about this yet in this episode, but like the tape and the like process involved in putting them back on and taking them off and switching them out is also, you know, always happens at the most inconvenient times.
Oh,
like
my word.
Before you want to go to bed or before you want to leave. And it's like, we're about to head out the door and I get this alert that says 0 units left. And it's like, oh yeah, I was alarmed, but then like I was distracted and here we are. Like I've got to do my pump, like got to do this. And that kind of leads into another aspect of, you know, signs of device wear that we were going to talk about.
Yeah, because, you know, up until now, we've been talking mostly about the way that these treatments and devices have a like physical presence in as much as they like their proximity, that they have to be by, they have to be near. It affects our decision making in relation to all of these everyday things. But if we're talking about something like an insulin pump, it is intended to inject insulin into your body, which means it has to be on it all the time. In it.
Yeah.
In/on. That's my favorite little slashy.
Slashy.
But so what that means is that these devices have to be attached somehow, and that gets to one of the things that you were just gesturing toward, because these adhesives that are used on either the infusion set for the insulin pump or to hold the like continuous glucose monitor sensor on to your body, these adhesives have to be strong enough to like maintain its hold for several days on your skin.
Yeah, some of the devices are like a week or two, right? So that's
so
even
now
more intense.
some of the CGMs are it's getting longer for sure. And there was one that was just FDA approved. I'm gonna have to go and look up some details because I haven't seen much about this CGM yet. But I think it was intended for like 30 days use.
Wow, that would be cool.
It would be cool.
Mine's 6 days for now, so that feels, you know,
unreal.
Never long enough.
And expensive to be changing out those sites constantly. But let's talk about a complicating factor there, because even in the context of, let's say, a 6-day CGM or a 3-day insulin pump, sometimes those adhesives are pretty harsh on your skin.
Yeah, I mean, reactions, like red spots, you know, irritation. It's really interesting because the way that they leave marks.
Yeah.
And then, you know, you're supposed to like rotate around, so you're not supposed to be doing it. But when you have two devices and this limited area of where it actually works for you, like there's a lot of people who experiment in different places and things like that. And for me, you know, when I wear them in different places, they get pulled off.
Right.
And so, you know, everybody finds the places that work for them and you try and rotate in those areas. But, you know, there's a lot of things that complicate that.
Yeah. And so, you know, we've got this issue of, okay, so the adhesives themselves can cause issues with your body. Because lest we forget, and I think we've touched on this a couple of times in other contexts, every body is different.
Yeah.
The physiologies, the processes involved in how the body is interacting with things is unique to every body. And so the chemicals involved in those adhesives can be totally chill with your body. Like your skin ain't no thing. That thing pulled right off. No big deal.
Well, it kind of depends on like what's on the surface of your skin too. I mean,
Sure.
you can clean the area as best you want, but it just depends on random circumstances a lot of the time.
It certainly can. And, but for some, it might be easy. For others, you leave it on for a day and a half and the rashing starts.
Mm-hmm. I've had that happen and it is miserable.
Oh, it's not.
And then you're thinking, ugh, like taking it off and wasting it is like such a, like the cost of that is a worry too. So people endure it and then it's like worse. And
so we're talking about itchiness on your skin. We're talking about pain, infection, all this kind of stuff on the surface of your skin related to how these things are interacting with it.
And then you have to just turn around and put it back on somewhere around the area, somewhere that it,
And so a lot of people are finding ways to try and deal with that. And you mentioned one, and that is, some people will use something like an alcohol pad or to clean the exact area immediately before sticking the thing on there. Let it dry and then pop that thing on there. And for some, that's enough because it gets rid of any of those those foreign objects, for lack of a better term, right, on your skin. But that if it's your body's reaction to the adhesive itself, that's not going to do it.
Yeah.
And so, you, for example, when this was becoming an issue, you got a prescription.
Oh, yeah. My doctor recommends Flonase.
Yeah.
You put it on right before and let it dry. And it's really fascinating how something like that,
right.
This works.
This spray that is intended, I use it all the time myself, but not for my skin prior to device connection. But the use of this pharmaceutical chemical agent, basically spraying on your skin in order to kind of act as a barrier between the chemicals on the adhesive and your skin so it doesn't react, is it's fascinating. And for some, it makes a huge difference. And it can influence the way that kind of rashing, irritation, itchy, pain kind of stuff from the adhesive. A
lot of people are really sensitive to those kinds of things. And there's different tapes you can try and different... It's crazy the amount of... it just is luck, depending on how your body's going to respond. And it's not always the same. I've gone through periods of time when I don't have any issues and then times when I'm very sensitive to things. And it probably has a lot to do with the dry, whether it's dry or humid or different conditions of what's happening with your body.
And so even if you are finding ways that works well for you to deal with some of these physical traces of these devices stuck to you, you can't rely on that being firm and steady, consistent, because bodies change all the time, as does the weather, like you said, as does, and sometimes they just don't stick.
Yeah.
Because if you have particularly oily skin in this place or this moment or usually or whatever, the adhesive might not work as well. If you live somewhere, I remember talking with someone who lived on the Gulf Coast, and it is really humid where they live, and the humidity made it almost impossible for them to keep the site on. And so there are a lot of those other kind of issues there. But the other thing that is important is not just on, like you said, but it's also in your body. And that
injecting,
leaves different... Yes.
Insulin into your body in one spot for a certain amount of days.
And so those things also leave traces on/in your body in ways that can raise similar kinds of complications.
Yeah, when you take the insulin pump side off, it is weird because it has this weird it's not really suction, but the way that it's attached to your body, it creates this indent on your body where the tubing has gone in, and it's really interesting. And that when you take it off, lasts for a little bit and doesn't go away immediately. And I remember showing you this close up, and I don't know if you just hadn't ever looked at it close up. I mean, we've been together forever.
Yeah.
That seems silly, but I remember your reaction to seeing it close up, and you were like, whoa, like this is really intriguing.
Well, because it's literally a hole through your skin that goes beneath the skin into your body, because the cannula, that like plastic tube, has to go in there to inject that insulin. And so when you leave that tube in there for several days and then pull it out, it's not like your skin just seals back up. It doesn't just seal back up though, right? The point is that it leaves a hole. And so you've got the red, potentially like the issues from the adhesives right there. And then you also literally are full of holes because it doesn't just go away that moment. For some, it doesn't go away for days or even weeks.
Yeah.
I remember having a conversation with someone, and it was a phone interview, and I remember her talking about this particular thing and how her body's healing processes were such that it was sometimes as much as like 4 or 5 weeks before the hole, the direct sign of that injection location went away. And so as we were talking, she said something about, well, I have, and I hear Russell, and she was looking at her body and counting how many she could see at that moment. And so besides the one that was currently attached, she could see 8 locations where she had been injecting over the past, I guess it would be like a month and a half. No, like 8's a little, that's not true. A few weeks anyway.
Yeah.
And that has real implications for how people can understand their bodies and what they're doing.
Yeah.
Or how they're interacting with others.
And the way you feel comfortable. I mean, think about wearing a swimsuit. You know, I mean, a lot of people are uncomfortable in swimsuits because of the way our culture makes us feel about our bodies.
Right.
But that just adds another layer of like, something you have to think about and worry about. People like, and I think there's a lot of people out there trying to dismiss the judgment and dismiss kind of, but that doesn't mean that
it doesn't mean it doesn't have an
that
influence.
People at the swimming pool are gonna, understand that. It's like, oh, what is that on your body? What is that thing?
Yeah.
What is that? Or what are all those marks? Like curious people are curious about things. You know, I'm a curious person.
Even if they're not ill-intentioned.
Yeah.
But also, even if we are conscious about the way that these socially constructed norms are limiting how we're supposed to act in society, it doesn't mean that subconsciously they're not still having an influence on our decisions, because they do. And, bringing up the swimsuit, this person also talked about how they had chosen to stop wearing bikinis because of these marks and had worn them consistently prior to their diagnosis. And, part of why that's important, you hear that and it's like, well, but like it's a big deal, you make another decision. But part of what is important here is that there are certain cultural norms. Like I said, she was on the Gulf Coast. And so the like social practices that she was engaged in all the time was usually out on a boat, swimming and or doing other water sports. And so, that kind of decision actually has pretty big implications.
Yeah, and emotional implications. And
yeah.
I think that's one of the biggest things that we talk about and kind of are fascinated with, is how these things like emotionally affect people. So, a conversation that definitely we want to continue having.
For sure.
As time goes on. But
and so, these kinds of traces, they can differ. And we talked about the kind of rashing in relation to adhesives. We talked about the holes left by these devices.
And even for like insulin shots, I mean, the amount of like, because you find spots that don't hurt. I mean, because people are like, oh, just move it around. You know, it's not that hard. You have lots of places on your body. But like when you think about it, how many shots you have to give yourself every day for everything you ever eat.
Right.
Not to mention like your long and lasting insulin. I mean, it becomes really taxing to find different places. And so then, you know, you're giving your shot in a similar place and you're building up scar tissue or you're, you know, different things like that can really affect. I remember when I went on a trip to Hawaii when I was like 8. I had a friend living there and my parents sent me by myself. And I remember going into the ocean and like I had, from where I was giving my shots in my stomach, I'd recently started giving my shots in my stomach because I'd always been kind of afraid of that. I'd always been my legs and my arms, and I was trying to give my legs and arms a break. And I remember the way the salt water stung my stomach. And it was, I don't know why I'm remembering this now, but like that's a really interesting, like, I remember it being very painful and, you know, feeling strange about like having those areas being red and rashy and hurting. And I mean, there's just so many layers to like the effects of these marks that are left on you.
Yeah.
Physically, emotionally, and
for sure. And so there are these outward things. You're also then talking about the internal things because there are a lot of ways that the internal scarring processes, you have buildup of your biomaterial in areas that are, I mean, because you are hitting it with an injector, it then stays in there. And even if it is designed in a way that is pretty good at dealing with people's systems, bodies still react to an object being forced into it over and over and over again. And so you've got the scarring, you've got what people refer to as these pump bumps, right? That's building up not only on the outside, but inside the body as well. And so, you know, we've got these really complicated web of the scarring and marking that are left as traces of these device uses, and it's layered with the social and emotional scarring involved in some of that as well.
Thanks for being with us today and joining our conversation, and we always appreciate the listens.
Make sure that you go and like and subscribe wherever it is that you are listening right now. Leave us a comment on Instagram. If you are on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, leave us a review. It only takes a minute, and it really does help us out. And lastly, do go check out Diabreadic.com, our new website. If it's not up right now, it will be very soon here this week. And so watch for some more content headed there.